Hollywood Squares, here we come.
Pretty good. All right, let's see. We're at 21. We've got a few more people probably trickle in, but how about if hi, Samantha. Let's see if we can make a start.
Renee,
welcome everybody. I'm Elias Krim. I'm the director of Solidarity Hall. And joining me, I'm happy to say for this conversation, is my colleague, Pete Davis.
So glad to be here. Hello.
Happy to have Pete back. He's been on kind of a sabbatical, just filled with life adventures. Too many to name. This is actually our fourth Utopia workshop, where Utopia, spelled with an E, means not envisioning some impossible dream, but rather a place of well-being as a kind of practical aspiration. So,
thinking in action.
That's right. Today we're talking about politics and democracy at a moment when we may be feeling a bit of what's called democracy grief. But we will also be talking about authentic power, where it comes from.
Or doesn't.
Or doesn't. Hannah Arendt, whom we'll be talking about, once said, "There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is a dangerous activity." And here at Solidarity Hall, ignore the man on the left. Here at Solidarity Hall, we've been always thinking about making this connection between thinking and action. So that's very much part of Arendt's view of public life. Pete and I are going to ask Fred some questions to kind of get this going about his work, his ideas. Along the way, please feel free to click the chat button down at the bottom box there and put in your questions. We'll try to get to everybody. We've got some special guests today. We'll try to talk to them a little bit as we go along. And we are recording in order to post this later on the Solidarity Hall YouTube channel. If you would, for the moment, please mute yourselves so we don't have any background noise.
Hey, Jeffrey, pull yourself up closer. You're way in the back. Nice to see your mug. There you go. That's good.
Hey, Fred.
So mute yourselves for any background noise, dogs, children, crashing sounds from outside.
Okay, so
I'm going to ask Pete to kind of set this up and introduce Fred. Pete, go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, Elias. We are so glad to be joined today by Fred Dewey, who I'm sure will be correcting my introduction of him live as we go. But
not live. Well, we are live. Okay.
Yes. Fred is a political and cultural activist from Los Angeles, or as I like to refer to people like him, a super citizen. And as
your heart.
As is the case with super citizens, people who see freedom as participation in power, people who take responsibility for co-creating our shared world, it's hard to describe them without a laundry list of the projects they're involved in, because when you start taking on the role of self-government, you get involved in a lot of things. But we will try to highlight a few of yours, Fred. Fred is the director of Beyond Baroque, was the director of Beyond Baroque, a poetry and cultural center in Venice. He was the founder of Portable Polis, a Berlin public participation project in which people do close readings out loud of Hannah Arendt and discuss the texts.
One page per hour.
Amazing. A true close reading. He has sponsored multiple working groups in California and across Europe at community centers, squats, schools, art spaces, among other places. And here's my favorite. I'm actually in love with this civic engineering project he did, which is in the aftermath of the Rodney-King uprisings, he helped lead a decade-long effort to establish neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles. And
they're a mess, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, we're going to get into the neighborhood councils. But I have to say, here's my personal connection to the neighborhood councils. Since hearing about them, I have asked every Angeleno I've known about the neighborhood councils, and they love
heard of them.
No, they love them. Everyone, maybe it's the type of friends I have that are involved in civics.
Oh,
but
that's great.
They love them, and they say they are a very big part of Los Angeles civic life. It's often the first thing they tell you to do when you have an idea about something
Oh,
is go to your neighborhood council, which is only there because of Fred Dewey.
well, actually, that's partly true. Now, where are you?
I am based in Falls Church, Virginia, right outside DC.
Okay. Now, I just want to point out here that it took talking to somebody in Falls Church, Virginia, for me to learn this. Yeah, we
Sometimes
have
you
some
know,
problems
they say,
in this country.
Yeah.
you are often, one is often honored by those far away from their neighbors than by their neighbors themselves,
True.
as is the case with all iconic people. Dewey is also the author of this book, The School of Public Life, the most splendidly formatted memoir I've ever read. And it's an account of letters and thoughts and ideas, future
And
thinking,
poems.
poems of his decades of civic activism.
A link is in the chat to the IndieBound
School
website.
of
where you-
Public
Got
Life.
several rants in it in case you feel sleepy.
So, Fred, I'm so glad to have you join us. And we want to get into your personal background eventually, but I'd actually like to just jump in with an idea question first, and then we'll backtrack to your personal background, which is, I love that you mention in the School of Public Life,
Yes.
you talk about, you have this section on what is power. And you said power is often thought to be by people to be something that's out there, that you need to build power or seize power or gain
That we
power.
don't have it. That we don't
That you
have.
don't have it. But you say, nay, that is not the case. We shouldn't overcomplicate this. Here's a quote: "Power is actually the easiest thing, for it is what we already have." Could you talk to us about that? Because I think that's the theme of the moment, the theme of this, and everything will stem from that. So what do you mean by power is what we already have?
Well, I was, like many, raised on people like Chomsky and Foucault, specifically Foucault in this case, Michel Foucault, French theorist, who basically lines up power as a disciplinary and punishing form. And I, through various good graces, got myself to Montgomery, Alabama, and had been doing some research on the bus boycott, or as Martin Luther King called it, the non-cooperation movement. And one of the things that I found striking about this, and I discuss it at some length in the book, in the chapter Polis for New Conditions, one of the features of the boycott was to reveal to the completely disappeared segment of the population called Blacks, that they actually had enormous power. And this was really a revelation, because King's agenda was pedagogical as much as anything else. He was teaching his people, the people, that they actually had power they didn't even realize they had. So all they had to do was say no. And no, we're not going to ride those buses, you creeps. So they didn't. And all of a sudden, the city came to a halt, and something, what I would call a kind of preliminary or preparatory nonviolent, I hate to use this word, but revolution, because suddenly the people realized how much power they had. And this is really, really important. This is probably the most important part of the book, because we really are taught from probably our first infant cry, not to be psychoanalytical about this, but that power is over there. It's somewhere else. It's not in us. And this is just not true. And it's been mercilessly beaten into us. It's a form of enslavement, actually. And once you start to think about this, once you start to realize, and I think the greatest thing about this moment is that we actually have some very important teachers in the country now called BLM. And the entire, I think, virtually the entire Black population in the United States, I think, understands freedom principles better than most white people. And they can't practice them. And they are beaten mercilessly to make sure that's the case. But they actually understand the structure. Now, what is this educational process? Well, anyway, I talk about that in that chapter, What is Power? And I can't, I mean, part of it was studying the boycott and realizing how important this was, how incredibly important. I think it's, I mean, Rosa Parks was a very well-schooled person in the school of public life. She'd spent time at the Highlander Folk School and I think Kentucky, Tennessee, training with Miles Horton. And anyway, she very well knew what she was doing, as did Fannie Lou Hamer, as did, I mean, the list is just amazing. And these people, we owe so much to these people, and we owe so much to this new generation of people who studied, I might add, the LA riots and what happened after the police acquittal, which is seldom mentioned as the cause of the riot. And we are facing a similar situation soon with our lovely Mr. Chauvinist, whether he will actually ever be truly prosecuted, charged, and filed away where he belongs. If there's an acquittal there, well, we're going to have a similar situation. So what is power? That essay was an attempt. I was in Berlin at the time, and I was really distraught. I've been through several gentrification battles around New York, first New York East Village, then LA. Then I moved to Berlin for a while. And I was really struck by how fatalistic the Berliners were about this. And they, as I discuss in the book, I try to narrate all of this personally in terms of my own experience and my own actions and my interventions and the problem with the very concept of intervention. I mean, there's some problems, as we know, in foreign policy. But I wanted to speak to these people to try and tell them, hello, you live in Berlin, you can fight to keep what you have. And the extraordinary freedom that I felt in Berlin, it was extraordinary. And it was being slowly chipped away by the political establishment, economic forces. And I just wanted to say to you, look, I know many of you have read your Foucault, and power is a bad thing. Power is what we're trying to get out from under. And we think we need to get it. No, you have it. You don't need to get it. And the people who are telling you you need to get it are the ones who want to lead and control us. We have it. It's between us. It's between us when we gather. It's there inherently because, and this is the most important part of this, we're the ones who keep these systems going. This is the lesson of the Montgomery boycott. Those people realize for the first time, we're the ones who keep all these systems going. That's power.
This is like when you discover we have essential workers.
It's very similar, yeah.
We
very,
didn't
very, very similar.
Lately.
Mm-hmm.
Now we do.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, Horton got in a lot of trouble. He's branded a communist at Highlander. He did a lot of work with labor organizing, or I prefer to call it worker organizing. And of course, the communists were very involved in the South, and that has problems, to say the least. But one of the things that they were focusing on was worker power and labor power and these kinds of things. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Elias.
You know, you have a quote in the book, Fred. Politicians hate us, the people, because we are their rivals.
That's right. Sorry to give you the news, folks.
What an amazing idea. I was counting on those guys.
Yeah, well, that's the point.
Right.
You really do. And
how can we be rivals? Go, tell us about that.
Rivals, well, yeah. I think the question of why they would hate us is more important. I mean, that's the first hate.
Yeah.
That's the first hate. That's the primordial hate. And I know it's sobering to think about this, and it's not true of all politicians. There have been great politicians in this country,
sure,
white and black. and yellow and brown and pink and the whole bit. But we are their rivals, the politicians, because the politicians are the ones who claim to have power. And their claim to have power is very important for us not realizing we have power. And if we have power, then everything changes.
Yeah.
Everything changes. And all of a sudden you realize power is not climbing your way through a political party. It's not, I mean, this also applies in corporations and climbing your way in a ladder, whatever. Power is about being able to do things, to make things happen, to govern your own conditions. And so politicians don't like that. They fight mightily to get those positions of power, and they're going to hold on to it whatever they can do. And this is where the political parties come in, because the parties are a tool to basically keep the people out. They're necessary for elections, etc. But so we are the politicians' rival.
Right.
And that's why people get beat up and shot. I mean, let's just be really frank about this. We're seeing this, thank God, for the first time. I'm going to be a bit, how can I say, rambunctious towards the white members of this group, but this is what Malcolm X was talking about all the time, every single day, every moment he was breathing and in public. So I think that power is it's complex in the sense that it reaches down into our cultural formations. This is the thing. That's why I started out this piece. Thank you, Pete. It's the easiest thing. I mean, just let's think about that for a second. Power is the easiest thing. You just have to understand that we're the ones who keep the systems going, not the politicians, not the economic thing, not whatever. You can run down the list.
So a question about this. I'd like to share this parable from Zygmunt Bauman with you and hear your thoughts on it. So Zygmunt Bauman said that politics has become like living in an RV park. And here's what he explains. He says, you pull up your RV and you have a spot in the RV park. And the quality of the RV park has very few amenities, but at its best, everyone's safe and they all have their spot and no one bothers each other. And you don't bother other people and other people don't bother you. You have all of your TV and your kitchen and everything inside of your RV. And sometimes the electric plugins and the water hookups don't work. And you start complaining, and other people in their RVs, you go knock on their doors and say, does your electric hookup and water faucet not work? And they say yes. And then you say, why don't we get together and walk over to the manager's office and bang on the door and demand them to fix the electric hookup and the water RV? And he says, the best case in politics is you get a bunch of fellow RV owners to go knock on the management's door, and then they fix the water hookup and the electric plugins, and you call that politics. But he says, and you think, oh, that was a big moment where there was a revolution where we got the electric hookups and the water plugins to work. But what never happens is you don't co-create the RV park. You don't become a community. You just have shared private grievances that you demand the managers of society to solve for you. And that's what we have as our horizons of the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is nothing solved. How do we move beyond the best case scenario of politics being coming together every so often to demand that the managers fix the minor things that we expect of them?
How do we get out of the RV park?
And start actually kind of having a shared community that we co-create together. What do you think about this parable from Zygmunt Bauman?
Well, first of all, I like not living in a mobile home. There are times when I wish I had one, one with pontoons. Wow. Well, Bauman's an interesting figure. He talks about liquid modernity. I wrote about him in a piece on the Degenerate Art Show, which was the Nazi show. He had written really a wonderful book called Modernity and the Holocaust. And it made a very important argument. I'm sorry, this is not a direct answer, but I'm hoping to fill it in some context. He suggested that, in fact, this barbaric thing that happened in Central Europe was actually at the heart of modernity, and that has all kinds of implications. Anyway, Bauman, I guess the first thing I would say is that his example is social. An RV park is a social proto-urban, I guess you could say, form. It's also usually full of poor people, and each of whom has found some way to cobble together the cheapest form of living they can find. I mean, I guess the problem with Bauman's example is it's cute, but it doesn't speak to people who are living in insufferable conditions. It doesn't speak to suburban homeowners who are not. It's not like a commoner. It's not a recognizable example. And besides, RV parks are like gated communities for the poor. I mean, they're gated. You can't, I mean, it's like, you know, the point of a city, the point of a community is that the boundaries, hopefully, if the political system hasn't stepped in heavily with armed guards, the boundaries are not fences and walls. And so the RV park, I don't know. It's like arguing that democracy is for white trash, basically.
I guess the point he was trying to make, Fred, is that, you know, politics has become people bringing their collective private grievances together and demanding managers solve them for them.
Sure.
As opposed to taking ownership over self-government and broadening the sphere of areas that we take control over. And that's what I guess he was going for with the metaphor. And, you know, sometimes—
I mean, it's a good start. I mean, yeah, it's a good start, I guess. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Fred, you just made a distinction between the public and the social.
The political and the social, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an Arendtian thing. I'm not sure everybody here knows what you mean by the social.
But I'm not even sure I know what I mean,
Okay.
but I trust her.
Help us out there a little bit.
Basically, the social is, well, first of all, the social, one of the prime constituents is the economic. And the social is not a realm of plurality, of fundamental difference as a distinguishing feature. Social is, she has this, I mean, look, there's so much stuff in art that I don't understand, and I think I understand it, and then I realize I don't understand it, and it's wonderful. It's a great experience, and being wrong, it's really important. But she says somewhere, I think it's in The Human Condition, she says, it's all about one. It's all various forms of one. And everyone follows the one, and not just follows, but embodies. And I would say, like, the social is things like the hidden hand, or of economics, or I mean, there's just so many facets to this. The point of the political for her is that it's ordinary. It's glorious too, but it's ordinary in the sense that it's made up of people. People, that's the opening line of my book. What about the people? And it's in italics. And the reason I did that was because we pay no attention to people, to person. And the social is, I mean, the best way to think of it is, what is the difference between, can somebody suggest a quintessential example of politics in our gang here? I mean, anyway, think of a cocktail party. That's social. That's social. And there are so many forms in society that basically follow that form. Gossip, hidden agendas, desperately trying to meet people, whatever, drinking, you know, I mean, there's just, I mean, run down the list, cocktail party. So the social has been what most people think of as politics. And the social includes bureaucracy, it includes parties. Basically, the entire realm that we think of as political is really the social. It's not politics in the sense of different kinds of people coming together and working stuff out. That's politics. And it is hard. It's hard because there are 500-year-old, like problems built into this. And they're extremely serious. So how do you get people who have serious grudges and totally justified grudges talk to each other? It's very hard. Now, one of the reasons I like focusing on the neighbors and neighborhood, is that people are just living near each other. Now, that can also be a form of exclusion, control, etc. But it's a good way to understand that people who are really different from you are absolutely crucial to power. It's not the same people. There's a section in the book where I say union, not unity. Now, unity is a very common reference point in politics. The people united will not be defeated. Well, this is true. The problem is the people will never be united. But in their difference, if they can come together as a union, they are very powerful. And I think I've wandered a bit from the original question. I'm sorry, but politics is about difference and plurality and coming together, and most of all, being in reality. It's the space for Arendt. It's the space of appearance, and that's why, I mean, this format is, hello everybody. This format is very frustrating, but it's also good because we are appearing to each other. We're coming together in some sort of kind of appearance. It's a simulation. It's a derivative. It's not the real thing, but it gives us a chance. We've got people in San Francisco. We've got people in New Jersey, Virginia, Brussels, London. Claudia, where are you?
I'm in London.
Okay, London. We've got London. We've got Massachusetts. We've got New York. We've got Berlin. I mean, this is amazing. This is new. This is very new. This is one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter is all over the world. And this is just an incredible thing. But politics is coming together. It's people experiencing their differences and realizing their differences are not a minefield and are not deal breakers. Because, I mean, one of the most extraordinary things about the Montgomery Bus Boycott was, after it was initiated by Blacks, I mean, it's sad in one sense, but the descendants of the masters, the white people, joined in. Many of the women who had hired help, who had to take the bus to get to work, said, wait a second, this is crazy. And people who had cars started pooling people to get to work. And you started to have this extraordinary space where people were beginning to talk to each other, probably, I would guess, as real people for the first time in their lives. The first time. Can you imagine? First time. Now, porches and houses. Porches got blown up. One of the leaders who actually was brought in from Atlanta, Martin Luther King, his house was bombed. And life was threatened. And, you know, I mean, this is not friendly neighborly behavior. But it does reveal what the political is about. Like when you challenge this disappearing act that the politicians pull off, you get in trouble. And that's why solidarity, thank you, Solidarity Hall, is so incredibly important. It's like, and the problem is people don't understand solidarity has to be cross-racial, it has to be cross-gender, it has to be. I mean, just forget it if we don't have that. I mean, and this is really a big thing to deal with now, because people who have legitimate grievances, extremely serious grievances, feel that their unity is their power. And this is, I understand this. I mean, but it's actually union that is their power. And the Wobblies, for example, were very threatening. And they were crushed by Woodrow Wilson, one of the great racists in American history. And they were multiracial, as were the populists in the 1870s and 80s. Multiracial. This is really threatening. And that history, like so much of our real history, has been written out of the history books. So politics is about different people coming together in union for their power. The power they already have that's easy, I guess, to sum it up.
I'd love to ask about this great, Horace Mann once said, be afraid to die until you've won a victory for humanity. And I feel your establishment of neighborhood councils in LA is one of the great victories for humanity in Los Angeles. And
hey, you're my buddy.
I'd love to ask about, I like flowering people with their, honoring the great accomplishments. And one of my, I'd love to ask it from this angle, which is that one of my favorite points made about civics was by this great Deweyan philosopher, Roberto Unger, who his great point about civics is he says, Americans love talking about civics and community and public life. You go to any government department and a lot of times it's a cult to de Tocqueville and a nation of joiners.
Sure.
And, you know, every politician, if you ask them, do you like community? They say yes, but nobody in America puts their money where their mouth is, in the sense that they don't demand that the government fund and enshrine civic organizations and participatory organizations.
Sure.
So they leave it to everyone to kind of, you know, have these participatory things come up, and then they run out of funding because they never enshrine it in law or in city or state budgets or national budgets. And the great moments where we have enshrined things, like the NLRB enshrined unionization within law. And
very important. Law is crucial.
And you, with the neighborhood councils, said, I'm not going to just start a nonprofit where we're going to get 1 or 2 neighborhood councils off the ground, and in 7 years it's going to run out of funding, and it was a nice experiment. You made a demand of the city to make part of the Los Angeles city plan have these neighborhood councils, and now it's part of the LA budget, and it exists, you know, so many years later because of that. So I'd love to hear about that fight and why you chose to make it a political fight and not just, well, like a official fight of like changing the law and enshrining an institution.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying the councils are not perfect. It's a mess. But the original representation in Los Angeles was 1 city council person for 200,000 people. I mean, this is like beyond an outrage. I mean, it's just so obscene that it makes me retch. Now it's more like 1 rep for I don't know, 2,000 people, 3,000 people. I mean, the councils are not strictly political. We knew we could never, ever get them into the city charter if we wanted them political. It would never happen. We studied the neighborhood council systems elsewhere that had been set up, and they always went for advisory power. And my theory was, you give the people a little power and they taste it and they want more. Thank God. I mean, there had been councils, but they were set up by the city council office, and they were just like, they were really only advisory, and they were just part of the political machine. You know, you get a neighborhood leader and they'd be put on it and effectively bought off. And this is a huge problem in the Black community. It's a problem everywhere in the country. The fight grew out of the LA riots. And that's why it's so interesting. I mean, it's wonderful that you guys asked me to do this, because the timing is just, I mean, especially if there's an acquittal of Mr. Chauvinist, Mr. Chauvin, or whatever, however you pronounce his name, which is not improbable. There's going to be some serious unrest. If you think what happened before is unrest, well, like, go get a cup of coffee and sit down, because this goes on every day. I mean, there's probably been like 4 policemen in the history of the United States that have gone to jail. And I'm exaggerating, maybe it's 2. So the neighborhood council, first of all, the idea, we weren't demanding it. I knew, and the other people who really wanted this, the city completely broke down after the acquittal. It broke down. I remember breaking curfew, and I talk about this in the book, breaking curfew and driving around and seeing these columns of smoke, and there were white looters. Nobody ever mentions this. It was a multiracial spree. And people freaked, as rightly they should, because it was very clear that the government was totally out of touch, had like beaten them over the head, had like let off these goons, and it was just outrageous. It was so outrageous that everyone erupted, and so the councils came out of that. People wanted power. They didn't realize they had it, but they wanted it. So I wouldn't say it was a question of demands. It was a question of rights. Question of rights. We have the right to power. We have the right to self-government. Every person in this country, every group, every community, workplace, neighborhoods, art centers, the dentist office, whatever. And so the council movement, which was frankly at the end, at the crucial moment, was like 2 people. It was not a movement. We called it a movement. We tried desperately to start a movement. And I have some problems with the notion of movement, because I think power needs to be in place. It needs to be where you live. That's where you meet people who aren't like you. You have to deal with them. You have to work things out. So the neighborhood council idea was power in place, and power in place as a tool to revive community. I'd done a research project in the inner city, interviewing people, quite a few in South Los Angeles. It was some weird academic project. I can't even remember what the reason was, but I was so struck. A couple of the people, I met one woman who was super active in like moving the trash bins and cutting the hedges and sweeping the sidewalks. And the police hated her. They hated her. They like tried to set her up. They tried to frame her. They would shine their spotlights in her living room window. She was just the sweetest lady. She was, I think, about 70 at that point. And I said, I like snuck this in. I thought they probably would have fired me on the spot if they found out. I said, we're fighting for neighborhood council, so you can have, something for your neighborhood. And she was like, oh yeah, right. Like the system's going to give us anything. Well, Mark Ridley Thomas, who ran the neighborhood, the political boss, he had a council, but it was a machine. It was part of the political machine. And what we were talking about was power in place that is not connected to the political machine. In other words, it's based in where people live. And this principle applies across the board. It's not just for, what we think of as politics, but in every facet of our lives, every facet of our lives. So do you have a say over your conditions? Can you say, I don't like these conditions. I want different conditions. I demand different conditions. And the only way that works, oh, goody, we have a youngster. Hello, what's your name? Oh, can't hear you. Fantastic. I'm hoping my nephew shows up. He's 14.
Okay.
Anyway, beautiful. Thank you, Rebecca. How do you govern your conditions? Now we have, thankfully, we have a youngster. I'm sorry?
Malachi.
We have a youngster. Yay. Hopefully, I think we have another, although the camera is not on. Hey, Sarah, is Gordon in the scene?
Hi, yes, hello there.
Oh, Gordon, my nephew, 14. Okay. Awesome, with one of his guitars in the background.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can take yourself off now.
That's great. It's kind of hard introducing the human element into this. Hello, everybody. Let's get down here and throw some chairs around. I think the youngsters will appreciate that. When you are powerless, when you look at the city going up in smoke and you see white people looting Best Buy, you know, you're thinking, well, something about this isn't quite working so well. As my friend Brooks, dear Brooks, he's publishing my next book. Love you, Brooks.
Yeah. There's two Leannes.
When that happens, you know something is wrong. This experiment, as Brooks says, this experiment is not working. And that was the primary lesson of the Rodney King acquittal riots, or uprising as it's referred to. And I mean, it's just, you run into so much insanity and baloney. I had a French semiotician, he was a friend, but I'd studied semiotics, and he approached me to do a catalog on the LA riots. And he said, Fred, let's call it a festival. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? These guys got acquitted. How's that a festival? Anyway, power is the ability to recognize in the moment where we are now, what it is that we do to hold up the system, to make it work. Because it's not working. So we need to say no. We need to pull back, and we need to withdraw, and we need to learn the lesson of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And the neighborhood councils are very, very far from this, but there's a lot of no's happening in no's, not this, but NO, in Los Angeles. A lot of no's. You see it every day now. And those no's are part of, oddly enough, they're part of building a neighborhood. They're part of building power in place, because you're showing that, you know, it's, and this is going to be the opening of my next book, which is, you know, the myth in political science. I think we can just throw the entire field out. Let's just say, okay, political science, you're useless. And the reason I say this is because one of the fundamental tenets of democratic theory is that it's based on consent. There's no consent in this country, none. Does anybody disagree with me? Well, yeah, I'm sure, but there is virtually no consent. So the system is not built on consent. It's built on something very different. And we need to recognize this and grapple with this and figure out, well, what does that mean? You know, and what does it mean? We don't need, like, taking responsibility for your lives and for the lives of others is not a burden. It's a beautiful thing. So neighborhood councils were a way to deal with the breakdown of literally the social order in Los Angeles. It completely broke down. For about 3 days, the entire city was in anarchy. And people said, what do we do? This is why it was beautiful. People said, what do we do? They had the chance and the inspiration to say, what do we do? And they came together across lines and neighborhoods to say, we need to do something, and we need power. We need to have some control and government of our own condition. Now, the problem here was that the communities that most needed this, that most needed power, the power they already had, were the minority communities, were the communities that had been crushed, suppressed, beaten, impoverished, riddled with drugs by the police department, for one. So how do you convince people that don't believe in the system and suffer under it every day? How do you convince them to believe in politics? It's really hard. And one of the standard ways is to have a movement. And this Black Lives Matter is very powerful because people are coming together and insisting and making claims, and they're getting results. They're getting results. This is the first.
Fred, I want to open it up in just a second, but I got one last question, because you describe yourself sometimes as a cultural activist. What has culture and the arts got to do with all this serious stuff?
Everything.
Good.
I mean, does anybody have a poem readily accessible? Let's read it. It has everything to do with it. I mean,
Beyond Baroque was a kind of a civic center. It was kind of a commons. Your poetry center in Venice, California, was a lot of things beyond a poetry center. It appears. Is that right?
Yeah. Poetry at its core is about meaning. And not in most of our experiences, you know, in school, whatever. But it's about meaning. And one of the great contributions that Arendt made is she said politics is about meaning. That's the bridge. Now, that has to be played out. But so why my taking on the Poetry Center was about trying to ground public space in a place and make as rich as possible a tapestry and experience for people to realize they could reclaim their own experience. Now, one of the programs I'm most proud of was the World Beyond series, which I crafted with a fellow by the name of Michael Datcher in Leimert Park, where we would have these readings at our two centers. Leimert Park is the center of kind of current Black life in Los Angeles. And we both were like, oh man, this segregation, it's impossible. You can't break it. It's unbreakable. And of course, segregation is only a symptom. It's a symptom of something else, but the symptom of the white power structure. But how do we get these communities? How do we alert other neighborhoods to our experience? How do we get their experience into our experience? And so what we devised was a system of readings of poetry made by the poets in each community. In our case, Leimert Park and Beyond Baroque, which was, as the Blacks like to say, the white poetry place, which it was to a great extent, but not all. And we would mix up these programs and move them back and forth from center to center. So the Black poets would read at Beyond Baroque and bring their audience. The white poets would read at the World Stage, an absolutely amazing, fantastic place in Leimert Park. And we expanded this out across the city in two festivals, citywide festivals. We brought in the Asian American community and Latino Chicana community in East LA. And we built up these crisscrossing poetry events in which the audiences from each community would drive across town. Oh my God, heaven forbid. They would drive across town and sit there with people they're scared to death of. I mean, really, come on, let's face facts here. Sit there with people they're scared to death of and share a common experience of beauty and words and language often that they did not recognize or considered untrustworthy, and wrestle with that. I mean, to me, that was totally political, to wrestle with language, the language that you have, to hear the words that mean something in a neighborhood, in a community, in a different neighborhood and community, not as a book, not as like, you know, poetry day, not as whatever, but in the neighborhood on a stage where people can meet each other and find them not threatening. And this is where difference begins to speak. And that speech of difference, not just difference itself, but the speech of difference is so crucial, because that's where you suddenly begin to experience reality. It's exhilarating. Friendships were built out of these events that endure to this day. I mean, when we first met to discuss this, something that we both bemoaned and wanted to address was not being able to change anything. It's like, you know, I mean, tokenism is a huge problem in this country. Tokenism. It's a problem in the art world, it's a problem in law, it's a problem, I mean, economics, the White House, whatever. So how do you get past tokenism to something real? And poetry is actually a very good tool for that. It's intense. It can be intense if people are real. Oh my God. I mean, I went down to the world stage about 2 months ago and hung out for a music night. Oh, it's just amazing. And 2 or 3 people who had been I'd hired one of them from the world stage to run my bookstore, our bookstore, and A.K. Tony, just an amazing poet. His skin was as black as night. And you can be sure that that kid experienced racism even from his own community. His skin was so black. And that is determinant. And it shouldn't be. It's not like I'm going to quote the liberal Nostrum, not the color of their skin, but the whatever their character. I mean, there's truth in that, though. And it's like, I learned so much from AK. AK learned so much from me. And we're friends. Now we're friends. And I think that's what we need is more friendship. More friendship. How do we build friendship? And that's where poetry can come in. I think, I hope.
That's friendship and politics. That's a big thing. That's a big subject. You know, I've got a couple people I want to suggest might want to ask their questions.
Oh, great. Yes, I'm sorry. I've been yabbering here.
Claire had a question about the common good, and then Mike Strode had a question too. Claire, can you unmute and ask your question?
Claire?
Here she is.
Oh, good. Hi. Hi, Claire. That's Berlin. Hi, Berlin.
Can you hear me?
Very good. Yep.
Hi, Fred. Hi, everyone else. Thank you. And I was just responding as well to Wolfgang, because he gave a comment about, or a definition of politics and the social. So politics should be about the common good, he writes, and the social about group interests. So I responded to that and tried to think, so does the common mean, combined interests, or does it go beyond interests? And if it goes beyond interests, what is it then? Does that make sense? Like how
sorry, I was just reading, there's like 50 unbelievable comments in the chat.
Yeah, we got a lot.
Oh my God. Okay. Can you rephrase that, Claire?
Yeah, so I think you got the part about Wolfgang's comment, so the definition about politics and the social. And then I was trying to think about that. So if politics is about the common good and social about group interests, so if we combine group interests, does that then become common good if we include all groups of society in this? Or is it no longer about interests? And if it isn't about interests, what would it be about then, the common?
Well, not to be academic here, this is going to sound a bit academic, but one of the distinctions that Arendt makes is the word interest is actually at the heart of everything. Inter esse from Latin, which means to be between. Now, that's not what most people think of as interest, but this came, I mean, there's so much, it's so fascinating because, I mean, her work on totalitarianism is really a history of modernism, or modernity, I should say, because one of the characteristics of mass society and the totalitarian movement was to eliminate interest, oddly enough. It was about sacrifice, it was about disappearing the self, all these things. So interest is a complicated word here. And group interest is even more complicated because what is group interest? Is it group, what is between the members of the group? Well, yeah, usually. Or is it what's between that group and other groups? How do you what is the common? One of Arendt's most radical and disturbing distinctions is that the common is not resource. I mean, it's partly resources. It's not us, like we're not the same, we're all different. The common is the world. It's the place we all are. We're all in it. We're all in it, and in it in every wonderful sense. We're stuck in it. We're in it. And so the common is the world that we're in. And if we can just recognize that we're all in it, then that's the beginning of some sort of recognition that we need to govern our own conditions. Does that answer your question, Claire? You could say no.
Yes, as well. I think, yeah, I don't know. I think one can go more into it as well, like really questioning, you know, if I see somebody who's different to me, how do I find where we link? I think it's so essential in our society.
That's the real question. That's the question.
And
Even
when they are pursuing the opposite from what I want, you know?
Yes, which is, I mean, if you're going to deal with reality, that's reality. How do you find the link with somebody who's pursuing the opposite of what you want? Wow.
Yeah. Mike Strode here has got a comment about a project.
Wait, hold on a second, Elias, because this is very important.
All right.
This goes to the heart of plurality and the challenges that plurality poses to us. You know, so I would say it's not so much finding common ground. You can't. I mean, Anthony Lewis wrote a wonderful book on the busing struggle in Boston that is just fantastic years ago, before he got booted off of the New York Times for talking about rights too much. The busing struggle. And the thing is that the blacks and whites in Boston, I mean, the North is, it's almost more segregated than the South. I mean, it's terrible. And Boston is a really rancid example, as was Chicago, as Martin Luther King discovered. Just absolutely implacable prejudice, resentment, violence, you name it. So how do you find a link with someone who's different from you and wants something that you don't want? Well, that's really the discussion. That's the discussion. That's the heart of politics, because you have to find it together. You can't take it from a politician. You can't take it from an academic. You can't take it from an economist who claims that the free market makes us all the same. We're not all the same. We're totally different. Each of us on this screen with all these boxes, we're all different. And that's the beauty of it, because if you get those vantages together, then you get a taste of reality. And if you're in reality, then you can govern. The whole point of the political system is to keep us out of reality. And that reality is made of differences.
Yeah. Mike, if you're there, you've got a...
Hey, I want to hear from Rebecca what she thinks about all
I'm going to
this.
get to Rebecca too.
Okay.
Until
And your child too.
Yeah.
Where did Gordon go?
I'm typing right now, actually, because I had it on mute because my children are loud.
Well, why don't you just
I was
say it?
typing into the chat as
What's
everyone spoke.
Go ahead, Grace. I don't know if Mike maybe tied up or something. Go ahead.
Oh, I was only pointing out that the segregation is
There's Mike.
terrible in the Northeast, and I think it's much worse in the Northeast than it is in the South, because it's not just it's not de jure segregation, even though it once was as recently as the late 70s and 80s, but it's a de facto segregation that's enforced along class lines. And because it's mostly in the United States, class functions as a proxy for race.
Right.
The lines are hard and fast, because really, I grew up in Connecticut, and those lines around class are very, very firm. That there's more class solidarity amongst the upper classes than anything else, any other solidarity I've seen anywhere.
Which includes black and white. I hate to say it.
Yes, it does. There's an interesting story that was unfolding about, I want to say 10 years ago. My old neighborhood in Hartford, Connecticut was having a big kerfuffle because a bunch of middle-class white teachers and like hospital workers and whatnot wanted to buy a house together in my old neighborhood, which was a very fancy neighborhood. And the neighbors freaked out. I mean, freaked out, because we can't have this, all these people sharing a house together. Next thing you know, it'll be like those frat neighborhoods over by the university. We can't have that. Now,
where are you based, Rebecca? Where are you?
Right now, I live in Ypsilanti, Michigan right now.
All right, okay.
Yeah, but I was just reading about the old neighborhood a few years ago. But the lie about that is all those folks, many of whom still live there from 30, 40 years ago, 4 families live in those homes. It's the owner and the 4 families that work for them. You know, their live-in nannies, their live-in gardener, their live-in chef, right? 4 and 5 families live in all those homes on that street.
Hello.
But only one of the 4 families pays the rent.
Ooh, yeah.
Their objection was because these people were not of the same class and they could not be in this neighborhood, full stop. That was their objection. But no one is going to say it in those terms.
No, they're not.
So,
like, is there a neighborhood council there?
What's it again?
Is there a neighborhood council there or any kind of local?
Oh gosh, no. No, there wouldn't be a neighborhood council there. Not in that neighborhood. Because they own city council.
Right.
That neighborhood owns city council.
That's right.
They don't need a neighborhood council.
Yeah, right. Of course.
So, that wasn't, you know, and I should follow up and see what happened. But it was looking like they were going to get this group home, for lack of a better term. It's like co-housing, or like, you know, it's a community. You know, it's like a commune or something, right? And of course, they didn't describe themselves that way.
Well, how would you propose 2 people who want to go in different directions and have different skin color meet?
Come again? One more time.
In that situation, how do you get people from different backgrounds, different realities to meet and to find, in other words, Claire's question is, where do we find the common? So
the common is it's in shared need, literal shared need. The thing I was thinking about the RV park metaphor is that, you know, if you move to this RV park and you're just there and the water works and the electricity works, there's nothing to prompt you. But the moment of crisis, when there's a storm and the electrical system no longer functions, that's your opportunity to form genuine community, right? It's like the classic, you know, you need a cup of sugar, so you go and ask your neighbor. There's a moment of crisis. You need sugar and you're not going to get to the store. So you ask your neighbor for help. And, you know, ideally your neighbor has the same culinary habits as you and uses sugar, right? Or maybe they don't. Or
Here,
maybe
I've got some NutraSweet. How about that? Yeah.
What's that?
I've got some NutraSweet. How about that?
Oh, how about some NutraSweet? Yeah, I'm going to turn my volume up. I can't hear anybody. Hold on. Is that working? I think that's working. So it's those moments of crisis that present us with an opportunity to develop genuine shared community.
Right.
I find it's an opportunity, though. It's not a foregone conclusion. A lot of people do things that are contrary to building community and developing relationships in moments of crisis.
Yep.
So it's not a foregone conclusion, but I think that's when the opportunity presents itself.
Well, I think, I guess to stitch together a couple of these questions, I think the question is there a space for that? Like, yes, you learn about your neighbor when you need sugar or milk, or, you know, you got to fill the milk bottle for your child and you're out of milk. Like, what do you do? And I think the question is, to some extent, those are private.
To some extent.
To some extent, not fully, but so the question is, where are the spaces for us to come together to talk about this?
Yeah.
That's really the issue. And I think, oh, Diana in North Carolina in Asheville. Oh, that's Jeff Kinzel. Hey, in your kitchen. Welcome. Sorry. It's good to have North Carolina here. That's a real battleground. How do you do it so that it isn't just a cup of sugar, but actually a regular space where people can come together and get a handle on what's happening on their block with their council that doesn't represent them, with a police department that is basically there to intimidate and divide. You know, and
I think I know somebody that might have a project that describes what you're asking for. Mike, the post you made about the writers' workshop and what's going on with Cola Nut. How about that?
Sure. Yeah. You know, the writers' workshop I was just putting as an amendment to the conversation around culture.
Mike, I don't see you. Is your camera? Oh, there you are. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's just an amendment to the conversation around the importance of culture as a sort of medium
Great.
and a context, you know, and you know, that the way that that factors in the work that I do with the Cola Collaborative and time banking is that I came to those spaces through other organizing spaces that were centrally focused on the work. And the challenge is if you only go to a space and you only see people when it's time to do a particular type of work,
Right.
then burnout is very natural in that space. It's like, okay, well, I don't really want to see you because every time I see you, it's something I have to pick up, and I don't want to pick up that thing. So the importance of culture in this space is like, there's something else to do. There's something else that we are here for. And, you know, so I mean, the writer's workshop was that. And, you know, one of the other things that I was thinking about as you and Rebecca were having your exchange was just the challenge of the context of Chicago, which, you know, has not gone very far from, you know, King's Day, right? Which is that I was actually listening to one of my interviews with Stacy Sutton of the UIC Center for Urban Planning and Public Administration, and one of the segments that I pulled out of there to kind of share as a piece of content last night was the notion that when you study urban planning, specifically if you study urban planning and you're from one of these communities that has historically experienced redlining and marginalization, your entire experience of the study of urban planning is a critique of urban planning, because planners were always at the table intentionally developing and designing communities that, you know, created these margins, right? You know, created these edges and these lines. And so the entire process, the entire design of a
Totally
thing.
stacked.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that's so for me, the challenge of like, you know, like I can go outside in Southeast Chicago in Jeffrey Manor. I can go outside and I can rally my neighbors who might have different class dimensions, and we can have a conversation. You know, specifically, I have neighbors who have different relationships with the police, and I have a different opinion. I have a much different opinion of the police than my elder neighbors, right? But, you know, I've lived next door to them, and, you know, they've never, I mean, there's no sort of, the animosity doesn't exist, right? There's a way that I can exchange with them. I actually don't
Watch
have
out, dude.
well, I don't have any cross racial dynamics though in my neighborhood, right? Because of the design of the city, right? It's nearly impossible. I would literally have to travel 45 minutes away from my home to really get into an actual conversation that's cross racial. And, you know, by that time, when you get over there, I probably don't want to talk to those folks because they've never really been in a social conversation, you know? So there's a lot of dynamics that I'm thinking through in terms of
my question to you, Mike, would be, how do you build a space? So this is what I was struggling with the World Beyond Poetry series, so that you don't, like, there's a regular place where you know you're going to meet people in the other neighborhood. You know, how do you build that space? We've got to. I mean, that's the core of this whole thing. And poetry, I found poetry was a very helpful thing, because it was I mean, pretty much everyone, at least in that world that I was part of, had a poem. I mean, everyone, you know, I mean, probably everyone on all these boxes has written a poem at some point, you know, and sharing those is very helpful. And you go across the city, I would drive across the city, you know, I mean, people, because they were, okay, so because, let's say, Bob's girlfriend was reading at the World Stage in Leimert Park, Bob would drive across to hear his girlfriend. They're both white. They're on a program with a Black person, an Asian person, a Native American, a Latino or Chicano poet or something. And this audience is completely mixed. And their groups are all there to hear their poets, their people. So how do you get it? I think the question I would pose here is, how do you get buy-in? Like how do you get people to drive across town and spend some time in a neighborhood of people with people that don't look like them? You know, because once you start doing that, then when there are problems, then you have I was really struck by this in Minneapolis, because, you know, Minneapolis, St. Paul had neighborhood councils quite a while ago. And I remember reading something at some point in the ruckus as it erupted, that they said, well, you know, we had all these channels to communicate with people in different neighborhoods. There was an infrastructure for us to talk to each other. Now, obviously things didn't go so well with the police department there. But I think, how do you build a space where there's buy-in and allows you to cross the city to want? I think the thing is, I think what people discovered is they wanted to cross the city. They wanted to be in a different neighborhood. They wanted to hear a different experience. Because when you hear a different experience, you're more grounded. You're more grounded. If you only hear the experience of your, brothers and sisters or white bread, whatever, you're not going to be any more grounded. That's where poetry comes in. That's where art and culture comes in. I don't know. What do you think? Am I crazy?
No, I don't think you are. I do not see any crazy in you. No.
Don't look too close.
There's a small area of concern that I find, which is just that we have a few of those spaces that some of them are traveling, like they travel around neighborhoods and to different parts of the city as cultural containers that do some of that work. And I'm trying to remember the name of one of them, but it's not going to come to me. The challenge is that the people who visit those containers are probably not the people who need the greatest level of work. And the people who might need the greatest level of work probably need to do some work before they come to the container, because if they come to the container, there's a great challenge that a conflict will occur if they come in there undone, as it were. And you have people, those just coming together.
You're absolutely right, but that's the trick is, and this is what Michael and I were trying to figure out, and the group of us, the steering committee, was how you get friendship, like your partner or your friend is reading in a foreign neighborhood, a foreign country, and you get in your car and you drive to the foreign country, and you're like, oh my God, everybody here looks different and scary. And that's true across the racial groups. If you're a Black person driving around in a rich white neighborhood, you're scared shitless. You don't know what's going to happen. So you drive across, you go to this neighborhood, your partner or your friend reads, and you have the experience of a bridge. And I think that experience of a bridge is what this is about, because if we don't build those bridges, this is going to sound liberal. How can I do this without making it sound liberal? But I can't. Rebecca says, no, I can't. Okay. Okay, how about friendship? Will that work? Maybe.
We've got a question from my friend John Madai.
All right.
Well, I was just going to comment, when you're talking about building power or the common good, what you're really talking about is information at the individual level, but shared information. That's what creates societies. If you look at the Rodney King thing, what happened to Rodney King was commonplace. But the only reason it got noticed is because somebody happened to have a camcorder. Okay. Now I was on a city council at this time when the police talked to me about it. I told them, well, the only thing I can suggest is a 7-day waiting period on the purchase of camcorders. Today, why are we having this?
All right.
Yeah, why are we having this today? Well, because everybody has a camcorder, and so we've noticed it now.
Not everyone has a camcorder, John.
Well, most people
have an iPhone.
Yeah, most people have a personal camera on them.
Oh yeah, Fred. Everybody.
Yeah. So that's why we're seeing these things now, because they are recorded, shared, they create information. Now that goes back then to creating culture. Because poetry, this is always an appeal to shared values or through shared symbols or the creation of
symbols.
That appeal to everybody. And so through art then, the shared information then gives you the basis to create culture, which gives you the basis to create these shared signals. And Andrew Breitbart was right. Politics is downstream of culture.
But can I get you to switch from the word information to experience?
I'm sorry?
can I get you to switch from the word information to experience?
If you like.
Because I think information has certain implications, and experience is a different. I mean, your point is great, though. I mean, I think it's really true, and I think it would be worthwhile to look at the George Floyd video, because I mean, it's hard. I mean, I can't watch. I mean, it's just unbearable. But you know, the police.
Without the video, it's not there.
There
George
nothing.
Floyd is commonplace.
Sure.
Yeah.
But knowledge of George Floyd.
But the irony,
there.
the postmodern aspect of this is the policeman knew he was being recorded.
Right.
So actually, it's not just recording, it's revelation, it's illumination. Like in that recording, the policeman knew he was like, he was performing for the camera. He probably was like half doing what he was doing. I mean, it's so savage.
Why though? You have to ask why. Why? Because from the culture he was part of,
right.
He was doing the right thing. He was showing George Floyd who was boss.
Well, and he was showing the person video recording him who was boss.
Exactly. And he had every expectation that this would be accepted.
That's right.
Okay, because that was the culture. Realize now that there are different cultural forces because, okay, and now they're clashing. So yes, art is important here. The poetry is important insofar as it appeals to those shared experiences, if you like, but the shared meanings. The people the other day who held their AR-15 and her pistol out there, Ken and Karen, whoever they were, because people were walking past their house, you know, they expected to receive approbation for that. Mm-hmm. They expected to be regarded as heroes for defending their neighborhood. So they were appealing to one set of meanings. Okay. But it's not working out because it's information is now around that collapses that that tight worldview that they were a part of.
I'm sorry, I'm going through the chat because there's so many great comments. I mean, geez, oh Lord.
We're about to run out of time here. Let me give you one last one, which is about the present moment. I heard a Black activist say this kind of a spontaneous moment is so powerful because it contains both beauty and danger. And so what's your sense of this public space? It's not in any formal sense, but the protests have taken public spaces in a way that would have been absolutely unimaginable 6 months ago. And so what is your, can you make an estimate of what is likely to come after, you know, now that we have a global collection of protests in public space?
Well, I think, oh man, what's going to come before is how I would rephrase it. We need to look at the before part of all of this. I mean, part of that's history, part of that's prejudice, part of that's investment. But I think the danger issue is really real, especially since we have a cracker in the White House. And wow, like MAGA cracker, that's it. MAGA cracker.
I think that's a slander on crackers.
I gotta think about that one. That's the danger. I think the danger is for politicians. I think we just forget this as a danger. I think it's like the danger is from the political class, or as I like to call it, the political caste. It's not a class struggle. It's a caste struggle. Arundhati Roy has been talking about this for a while. Blacks know this. The plantation society was a caste society, and they are still stuck in it in the South. In the North, it's a caste society we have. And the political caste, along with its economic subunits or whatever you want to call them, that's I think we have to be very shrewd and careful about this, because that's the danger. It's not us, it's the political people. They stir up conflict. They stir it up. And it's not just one party, it's both parties. The two parties keep power by stirring up conflict. That's how they keep power. That is very dangerous. That led to a civil war. One party, and this is, this is a seldom recognized fact of political history. The South was run by one party. It was the first totalitarian state in modern history. Totalitarian at the end, not all the time, but at the end. And it was run by one party that is still very much half in charge of the country, called the Democratic Party. And as dear Mr. X said, a Democrat is a Dixiecrat in disguise. And that disguise is very well worked out. So this is the danger, in my view. I think we're in for a rough ride. But that rough ride has been there all along. And so we just know, it's just like, as Patrice Cullors and some of the other people in BLM have pointed out, it's like, hello, we were just trying to have a good portion of the population like what we deal with every day. Okay, folks? So they took it uptown. They took it uptown. God bless them. So I think the danger argument, look, this is an extremely violent country. But where's the violence coming from? Where is it coming from? Do you hear this question asked? No, nobody asked this question. It's not an allowed question where it comes from. They rubbed out like 8 or 10 of the most important energizers of civic life in the 60s. Has anybody figured out who did that? I'm sorry to be controversial here, but violence is pandemic. That's the real pandemic. And it saturates, it's at the heart of lying. It's at the heart of image making now. It's at the heart of just about everything. And so the danger that we have to watch out for is from the political order, in my view, and we must be vigilant. We must be vigilant, because we are going to be pulled into something if we're not. And that was what was so beautiful about the neighborhood council movement, was that we were pulled into a real mess, and people started coming together. And this is something that Arendt talks about so beautifully in the latter part of her life, the spontaneous nature of council revolution. It's spontaneous. When a society breaks down and a political order is illegitimate or illegitimized, as I would argue it is, the people start to organize. So we look for where the people are organizing. And it's not just organizing in a movement. It's like organizing in place, to get involved civically, to recognize that you have things to protect, to realize where the threat comes from. And it's not just the police. The police are working class, many of them, and they are really struggling. I would say probably 80% or 90, maybe more, I don't know. I mean, I don't have any cops who are from, but I want to hold up one of the reasons. This was my license plate. Freedom X.
Freedom X.
I took it off of my car because I got stopped by cops. Anyway, and nearly beaten.
Oh my God.
I think the point here is that how the danger is being tricked. That's the danger. Because it's not, I mean, everyone was scared. I mean, there was a guy, my neighbor was out on the corner, shouting at the police, like, arrest those people, they're looting my neighborhood. And, I don't get along with him super well. I mean, I was scared. I mean, people looked at me like I was the problem when I was walking down Main Street. I understand it. I'm not the problem, but I am the problem. I mean, it's very complicated. So where's the danger come from? I think the danger is in each of us, just like the responsibility. responsibility in each of us. And to be aware of, to talk about real politics, not this baloney of the parties and cracker in the White House. And, you know, I mean, it's tempting, you know, and that's what they want us to do. They want us to buy into this party battle. You know, of course it's important. We don't want them in there. But some of us do. So what do we do? What do we do? What the hell do we do? Well, I'd say get rid of the parties. They're illegal. They're not in the Constitution, for one thing. You know, they're tools for winning elections. They should not be running the country, those two parties. That's the danger. And if you go back to some of the whites who led the revolution, George Washington, one of them, his final delivery speech, another white fellow gave a great final speech, Ike Eisenhower, but Washington's speech was all about the danger of faction and parties. It's often interpreted as the danger of faction, the danger of difference of groups. But what he was really talking about was the danger of party. And they had all studied British history and the Civil War in Britain and all kinds of things. And they knew that once you have permanent parties, you have serious danger. And sorry.
Can I give Rebecca a sign off here? She just sent me a note.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, because I know we're getting close to time, and I just wanted to, one thing, that this mechanism of state violence that Fred's talking about animates a lot of things, precisely the structures that we're trying to fight against, to create spaces where we connect with each other and all that.
You betcha.
And if I'm really just blunt and honest to that question of like, how can we have these spaces? We can't. We can't. Those spaces don't exist on purpose. And the unique opportunities that are presented in crisis, now mind you, it's a vulnerable moment. It's a dangerous moment. It's when authoritarians step in. But this is the moment for us to do anything, to connect across our genuine needs and develop the culture of meeting those needs and to sustain and nurture that culture. And that is the mechanism. Art is the mechanism that humans use to nurture and sustain that culture. So the poetry, the music, the experience of those times is what calls us back into maintaining those relationships that we developed in crisis. And really, the crises we face jointly right now, this is the space.
That's right.
This is the space.
That's definitely
okay, but I just want to say one thing we need to do. It's beholden on us to plan for the future. Because if we only operate from crisis to crisis, then we are being controlled by the crisis. So we come together and we say, what is it that we want? Rebecca, what do you want? You know, what is the governing form that you want in your neighborhood? Like, let's just do pie in the sky. And let's start planning for that, because there will be a moment, I predict, Fred predicts, this is it. There will be a moment, and possibly very soon, this is one of the things I learned and I talk about in the book, is that moments come when power is available to the people. And if you're not ready to propose a structure, then the people that had it before will take it right back. And so the trick is to be ready for that, not just to operate in crisis, but to say, okay, what do we want? What would we wish for? As Claire pointed out to me in a wonderful song that has been done by the Beach Boys. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? Let's figure out what would be nice. Not from a point of view, because crisis is about violence. Crisis is about being faced with something where necessity is so prevalent, right? It's like
I think that's, yes, I'm not actually disagreeing with you, but it is crisis that brought forth Mondragon. That's why it exists and persists to this day.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So some of the things that we really think are most valuable in our lives were born from crisis, and we took that opportunity to translate what we did in crisis into our everyday lives.
Well, we start meeting. That's one thing that happens. We actually start meeting. And the trick, I think, is to read and figure out what we want. Because like in Los Angeles, a moment came where the city looked like it would fall apart. Not the riots, but secession. And at that point, the political establishment said, whoa, our power's on the line. We got to give the people something. And we were there with a proposal for what to give the people. Like, this is the thing. And this is why BLM is so effective, because they have a proposal for what the politicians should give the people. And I think that's our job, wherever we are, to think about what we would want, what we wish for, what we care about, so that in the crisis, when we come together, we say, not just vote for so-and-so, but like, no, we want self-government, we want power. And what are the structures that we want them to be in? Like, okay, a regular meeting place. I mean, the resources of this country are, so misallocated. And as Eisenhower said, everybody focuses on its particular military-industrial complex, which is totally justified. But what he also said was the disastrous rise of misplaced power. So how do we get power in the right place? And what are the structures we would want?
Jeremiah has a good suggestion here. It's too bad we can't go out for a drink and unpack some of this. Thank you, everybody, for showing up, and especially Fred Dewey. Amazing man, amazing conversation. We'll hope to see
you. Thank you.
Things.
Thank you, Elias.
Peace.
Long live solidarity among the people.
Thank you.
Not the ruling caste.
And also with you. Thanks for coming, folks. Great to see you all.
Yeah.
Hollywood Squares.
Bye.
Bye, Fred.
Until we ride again.
So great seeing everybody. Bye.
Fred.